we're going to be using just about every technique that is available, for the most part, at least the ones that are most commonly used, from Brihat Parashar Hora Shastra. There will be a few minor variations on techniques, and it's not even really minor variations. There's just a particular way that I've seen to look at a chart that gives you an understanding of how life is going to play out over time based on planetary positions within the birth chart itself, the main birth chart, but also within the Vargas. Okay. Now, a few things I want to bring up before we actually jump right into what the dashas are, how to read them, how to understand them. I want to talk about the idea of prediction in astrology, and astrology just in general. So there's an idea, and I believe it's held by a lot of people, that astrology, if you could just do it perfectly right, that you could plan out your entire life, that you could look at someone's chart and you could see exactly what's going to happen within their life. And that comes from more of a fatalistic culture, I believe. And we have to remember that Vedic astrology is coming from India. And in India, there is the idea of gurus, the idea of astrologers, jyotishis. And there's this authoritative hierarchy. You know, for example, even in the caste system with the Brahmins and the Shudras and so on. And the reason I bring this up is because we have to remember that astrology, as I've said before, hopefully will turn out to be like any other science, where we're looking to the past for inspiration, to see the principles that people have used in the past. Let's see. We're seeing the principles that people have used in the past to understand the universe and the world around them. And this is one of the things that we went into with the Prajna class that we did. Because with Prajna, we started to see that by just paying attention to your own inner states, by paying attention to the motion of the planets or the omens around you, you could actually get a sense of what the answer to a question might be. And this is essentially what we're doing with astrology. We're using external phenomena to get an understanding of what's going on within us. So anyway, point being that with astrology, you can see a lot about an individual. And what the birth chart is indicating is what are the thoughts, the habits, and the tendencies, and the states of consciousness that an individualized aspect of the divine, the individualized aspect of this vast infinite consciousness, continued throughout however many lifetimes they've been around. Now, what does that mean? If you have a temper, or if you have a difficulty getting along with people in your work environment, and it's a consistent issue for you, now to you, you think it's normal because you've grown up with it, you've supported it throughout however many lifetimes you've been around. But to other people who don't have that experience, it seems strange. And the reason it's there is because at the moment you were born, the planets and the stars were lined up in such a way to imprint on your physical genetics, your physical body, your energetic body, your astral body, this capacity to attract and get yourself involved in these kinds of experiences. But from the moment you're born until now, if you're somewhat awake and aware and conscious, and you can bring your, if you can understand that that's the case, you can actually start to change the direction of those karmas as they are arising. So we have to remember that karma is the collection of your habits, your tendencies, your thoughts, your states of consciousness, and these can be very subtle. That's the hard part about all this. It's very subtle. Because, you know, it's one thing to say to someone, oh, well, you always pick bad relationships because you don't have good karma for relationships, because in the past you haven't put much attention to figuring out what does it take to have a good relationship. It's one thing to say that, but it's another thing to say to someone, oh, you have a chronic illness, or you have, you're in an abusive situation because you have a karma for it. Well, it's one thing to say that, and it has some truth to it. But the reason you don't always bring that up is because when it comes to physical things, or when it comes to abusive relationships or negative relationships, you have to remember that you're dealing with human beings, and the human consciousness is very much invested in an idea of their personal story. And so to say that you have created your own personal story with something as practical, or not practical, something as material as health, not everyone wants to hear that. And the other problem with that is if you say that and you believe it and you really work with it, well, it may be that your karma is so strong for chronic illness that the only way you're going to change it in this lifetime is by bearing that illness, and even you might even die from it. But the point being is that if you're surrendered, and you're letting that illness, that karma for that illness exhaust itself, and in your mind you're holding a consciousness that you are healthy and that you are well, your body might not immediately all of a sudden become healthy and well, because that karma can be so strong that it actually has to persist throughout this entire lifetime. But if you can hold that consciousness that the body is just processing this negative karma, or this health karma, and then you pass on and you incarnate again, when you come back, well, now you've actually burnt out that karma, and you've held the consciousness of well-being, and you've learned what it takes to be well. And so the next time around, you start out with a different chart, because you've consciously exhausted that karma. So one of the things that we have to be aware of is that there are different grades and different levels of karma. And that's one of the first things that I do talk about in the Art and Science of Vedic Astrology Volume 2, which will be out next month, is that, yes, I know, I've been saying that for a while, but it actually will be out next month. All the edits are just about done. But there's these different kinds of karmas. There's a karma which is weak. And what is a weak karma? A karma that is weak is something that when you're looking through a birth chart and you're studying the entire birth chart, you only see it show up once. For example, we might be looking through someone's birth chart and we see that, let's say, the fourth lord is in the third house, and say it's a negative dignity. Well, that can be an indication for problems with vehicles, or problems with short distance travels, or even an accident if other things play into it. But it only shows up once, which means that it's not supported 3 or 4 other times throughout the chart. So that's a weak karma. That's something that if you have an awareness of it, an understanding about it, you probably aren't going to experience it. You can probably change it. Now let's say that you have a karma that indicates severe illness, or having a child, or those are the two that I'm going to be using today. Let's say you've got those two karmas. Let's say it shows up in 3 different areas of the chart. Let's say in the birth chart it shows up 3 times. We can have the ascendant lord in the 8th house, karma for difficulty with chronic illnesses. We can have the sun in a bad situation, in a bad dignity, being starved by Vimshottari Dasha. Well, the sun is a karaka for the body and our vitality. And so now we have 2 indicators for severe chronic illness. And maybe then we have Saturn in the 7th house, aspect in our 1st house. Well, that's 3 indicators for chronic illness. So when the dasha of those 3 planets run, more than likely, that's going to be the fixed karma that you might have to bear. And maybe you can make it through it, and maybe you won't. But the point being is that that's how we can start to see when is someone going to move through a karma and when are they not going to move through a karma. It's all based on this idea that some things are less fixed than others based on how much attention we've put towards it. And you can see that in life in general. I mean, think about people who get involved in relationships and they've put 20 years in and they've got 3 kids and they never get divorced because they think, I've already put so much time and attention here, and I've got 3 kids. Getting a divorce is just going to be, I'm going to have to start all over, and they don't want to do it. So that's a fixed karma. They've locked themselves into that pattern. And this is also why when it comes to yoga and meditation, which is very important for a Vedic astrologer, that we have to remember that the approach to meditation, the approach to our yoga practice, and the approach to our spirituality, we can't look at that from a human perspective. Because from a human perspective, we want to have a family, we want to have friends, we want to have all the good things in the world. But from a spiritual perspective, or perspective on self-realization, you can have those things. But if those things get in the way of what you want to accomplish, namely self-realization or greater knowledge, we can't think like a human anymore. We have to realize that we need to think like a self-realized being, which isn't going to be attached to all these things. And the reason I bring this up is because with Vedic astrology, you really have to let go of your own story, and you have to let go of the story that people might be holding on to. Because if you get caught up in the story that people might be holding on to, you might not give the best advice because you don't want to tell them that there's a negative karma coming up, or you don't want to tell them that it's probably a bad idea to have children, or you don't want to tell them that they might lose their job. You know, these sorts of things occur. But if you develop a sense of discernment and detachment, what you can do is you can see a difficulty, and then you can say, okay, there's a difficult time period coming up. If you do such and such remedial measure, or if you start trying to think different or act different or behave different, and the behavior is going to be based on what planet's involved, like if we take Mars in the 10th house, a person can have problems with authority figures because the person themselves are too impulsive, or they get in confrontations with authority figures. And if you see a dasha running where that Mars in the 10th is getting activated, you can tell them there may be problems with your job, and it's probably going to come because of confrontations with authority figures. So if you want to keep your job, you might want to be aware that you have that tendency. If you want to get out of your job, well, then you can capitalize on that and be difficult, and you'll get fired. So this is where we start to see how the planets work out, and how we can see how the dashas are going to stimulate those planets. Okay, but anyway, back to my initial point. Between the time you're born and now, for yourself, for anyone else, the more conscious you are, the easier it is to resist the karmas that are negative, and you can put attention towards the positive. And the reason I bring this up is because you can't be fatalistic about astrology unless you're dealing with a fatalistic person. And there are plenty of those people in the world, and you can usually recognize them if you know what to look for in a chart. But if you're dealing with someone who realizes that this universe is dynamic, there are multiple levels to it, that we have a choice in regards to what we put attention to, what we bring into our life, what we allow into our life, then the more conscious the individual, when you're talking to them about dashas and timing and predictions, you can say, these are the potential trends based on the karma that you had at birth. And you can say, now, if you've already worked through some of these things, or you've gotten distance and detachment to see what they are, then when it comes up, recognize it, whatever that trigger might be, and you have a choice. You can let it exhaust itself, you can try to resist it, but overall, it will have to express in some way. And that's a difficult thing to say, because a lot of people who come to an astrologer, they want you to give them a way out, and usually they want an easy way out. For example, you can tell someone they're going to go through a difficult health period, and you say, well, this gemstone might actually help you. And there's a way to check for gemstones to see if they will help you, because you don't want to encourage people to just buy gemstones because you think they're great. There's a way to see that in the chart. But maybe you actually see that a gemstone will actually help strengthen the body. And it ends up being, one of those most expensive gemstones, like a blue sapphire, white sapphire, an emerald. And they say, wow, that's a lot of money. And you chuckle to yourself, or at least I do sometimes, because I think, wow, well, you could have tens of thousands, $100,000 in medical bills, which is burning off your karma, or you can make the initial investment to start to wearing a gemstone and doing a regular mantra meditation practice or charity practice to pacify that planet. But what happens is, if you look at a chart that's more fatalistic, or talk to a person that's more fatalistic, oftentimes they won't accept the remedial measure, or they'll say it's too much work, or they don't have time to meditate a half hour every day, and then the problem comes up and they want to know why. And you mention that you gave them a remedial measure and they might not have done it. But if you're dealing with someone who is not fatalistically inclined, they see the trends, the possibility of trends. They realize that their current choices affect their future experiences, and their past choices are what's affecting their present. Then they'll say, okay, I'm ready then. So I see there's going to be a difficult period coming up. You've told me what to look for with Mars in the 10th. There's going to be some confrontation with bosses or authority figures, or you've mentioned that there's Jupiter in the 6th house, and so there's issues dealing with excess or too much indulgence in fats and sugary sweet foods, these sorts of things. And so they're ready for it, and they're able to pull back, and they don't necessarily experience it as much. So you have to keep this in mind, that it would be wonderful if truly the universe was designed in such a way, and that the sages of old knew exactly how to look at a chart to see every possibility. But I've not found that to be the case. And as an astrologer, I don't want you to beat yourself up if you make a prediction, or if you see something in a chart and it doesn't come to pass, or if you see something in a chart and you're not sure about it and it does come to pass. Because everyone's how they live their life and how they think about the world will reflect how they experience what you share with them, how they hear it. And so it's not always your fault. It may be that their karma was set up in such a way that there was no way you could have seen it. But then later on, this is the funny thing, later on you go back and you check the chart and you wonder, how could you miss it? Or there have even been times when I've done predictions for people where I've mentioned something and it actually came to pass, good or bad, and I went back to double check the chart, and for some odd reason I couldn't see, why did I even say that? I thought to myself, well, this is crazy. Why would I have even said that you're going to get a job here? Or why would I have even said that you might have an illness during this time? But it came to pass. And so what we have to remember is that as astrologers, there's more to it than all these numbers and all these symbols within a birth chart and all these formulas. You need to have those formulas because you have to have the proper foundation. You have to have the proper structure to access so that you can funnel the proper information for the client. But there's more going on there than you know. And if you think about it, just briefly, think about people who predict the weather, or people who predict financial things, or people who predict the probable health of an individual. Think about how many times those things go wrong or are incorrect. But there is a consistency to it. So the odds are typically, based on science, the odds are typically, if you've studied meteorology and you're very good at it, you will be able to predict storms or changes in weather or precipitation. But we have to see that sometimes things come out of nowhere, and even the best don't predict it well. Or when it comes to medical situations, you can go to the best doctors, and some will say you've got 6 months to live, and you end up living 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years. Some will say, you're going to be fine, you've got 10 years to live, and someone dies the next day. So we have to always remember, as astrologers, you need to learn the material. You need to do your best. But you need to realize that even the science that is currently accepted in our society doesn't always have 100% results. So it's unrealistic to think that you're going to be perfect at it. It's unrealistic to think anyone's going to be perfect at it. However, if you happen to meet that perfect astrologer, do send the information my way, because I would like to talk to this person. So keep all this in mind. This is an art and it is a science. And this brings me to one final thought before we actually talk about dashas, is that having a regular meditation practice, having a regular, we'll just call it a spiritual practice, is really important for an astrologer. Now, some astrologers are just amazingly psychic, and they can look at a chart and just in a flash, everything lights up that they need to see. They don't even have to go through and analyze it. They don't even have to do those, how many steps did I have at the end of that last class? So in the step-by-step class, we had 15 different steps with 13 sub-steps in each one. So they don't even have to go through all that. They don't have to spend the 12 hours that I recommended in a chart. They just see it and they get it. It's more of a psychic issue. But what does that mean? Well, they've practiced in past lifetimes, obviously, and they've developed this skill, and it's coming out now. But I look at the world and the universe and consciousness in general, not as a mechanical thing. And that's part of the issue and the problem with defining arts and sciences such as astrology, is that we're used to thinking about things in a mechanical way. You know, the apple falls from the tree because of gravity. You put your foot on the gas and your car goes forward. These are mechanical things. But there's more to all of this than just mechanics, because mechanics cannot create consciousness. Mechanics cannot create a being or an entity that has the capacity to build something as amazing as a computer. I mean, if you ever think about some of the things that we have in this world, how amazing they actually are. Mechanics can't do that. And that's because there are different levels of mind and consciousness. There is the mind that we have that we're communicating with now. I'm talking, you're hearing the words, you're processing them, you're making sense of them based on your own personal experiences, you're making up a story, you're learning something. That's a mechanical way of doing it. But what is going on that moment when it's been 3 hours after you've taken the class and you're sitting there quietly and you're contemplating what we've talked about, what we've discussed, and you have an aha moment, a breakthrough, where you all of a sudden something clicks and you understand how to read dashas a little bit better now based on where you are. What's that? Is that a mechanical thing? That's the source of creativity and the source of invention. And the more you meditate, the clearer you get, the more detached you can be from who you think you are as an individual. Then what I say is that you're accessing the rest of you, the rest of your consciousness, which is beyond the mind. And so I do believe there are laws, and I do believe there is a science to the astral issues that go on, to the causal issues that go on, to that space that you're in when you're beyond the mind. There's a structure to it. But in this current body, we cannot know it, or we cannot perceive it or communicate about it clearly, but we can access it, and we can utilize it on these other levels. And so the better you get at meditation, the clearer you get. You can look at a chart and you have all of those rules, you have all the Karakaships, you have all the Ajatati Avashtas, you have all of the Ashtaka Varga, understanding all the dashas, all the Baladi Avashtas, all these you have all these rules and all these ideas within your head. And so then you meditate and you get in that space where you're clear, and you look at a chart, and the person asks you a question, and you're quiet inside, you're silent, and you just look at the chart, and you pay attention to where your attention is drawn, and then you pay attention to the concepts or the rules or the laws of astrology that we know currently that get activated within your mind, and you explore that, and you follow that path, you follow that route that this greater consciousness, this greater understanding is leading you through. And they often say, an astrologer needs to pray to his Ishta Devata, or let the Ishta Devata, the concept of the divine, come through you to do the session. And that's fine, that's one way to think about it, but really the self is one thing. The self is the gods, the goddesses, your body, the computer in front of you, it's all one thing. So whether you call it the Ishta Devata, or whether you just know it's the rest of you, it doesn't matter. But if you let that intelligence that's greater than the mind lead you through the chart, that's where you're going to do your best work. So you want to have all of the techniques that you can get, that you're curious about, that you enjoy, in your mind, in the structure of your brain. And then that's the form, that's like the body, the skeleton. And then you let this intelligence, which is greater than all that, flesh it all out to be the muscles, to be the movement. So this is why it's an art and a science, because it's scientific in the sense that you want to have as many rules and laws that you can get, astrologically speaking, that we know of now, but you also want to be open to being guided by greater intelligence. That's when you're going to do your best work. And I mention this to you because you've probably already experienced this with all the books that you've read, with all the classes that you've taught, with all the teachers that you've met. There's so much contradiction. One teacher says this, one teacher says this. One book says if you have this combination, then this occurs. The other book says no, that won't occur. So there's so much contradiction within the body of knowledge that we have. But if you learn it, it's more than likely that that law or that rule which contradicts this other law or this other rule has its place and its use at a certain time in a certain place. And so it may be that when you're doing someone's chart, you remember this one particular aspect, and then you follow it and you get the right answer, or you get the right information for the individual. So I want to encourage you to let go of your black and white thinking. I want to encourage you to let go of your mechanical thinking. I'm not saying be a goofball who doesn't learn, what the avashtas are, or who doesn't learn how the cusps are situated and just makes things up because they're psychic. I don't want you to do that. And there's nothing wrong with being psychic as long as you get good information. I want you to really study and study hard, but I want you to also have that capacity to relax and to let the rest of you do the work. Because the worst sessions I've ever done, the worst work I've ever done, is when I think I need to sit down and crank through the entire chart, analyzing every particular Vashta, every particular rule, every possible combination. By the time I'm done doing that, I'm so confused because the chart is just all over the place. But if I come at it from a state of clarity and peace, I know that I've done my studying, I've done my years of research, I know that I know my stuff fairly well, then I let what I already have in my mind to organize itself by this greater intelligence and give me the right information. Okay, so keep this in mind. Now, for those of you who are new in this style of class, or those of you who are new to using this WebEx function or haven't taken a class with me before, this is one of the things that we want to do. So you've got your chat box, and we can already see some of you are already using the chat box, so that's good. In that chat box, I would like you to, as we go along, type in any questions that you have as we go. And the reason I do this is, number one, so that everyone doesn't talk at once. Number two, that encourages you to actually really think well about what you want to ask, and then typing it in. So, because a lot of times, when you take classes, someone ends up asking a question, it goes on for like an hour and a half. So this helps you be very precise. And then I have a list of questions that I can go through. And then as we go through the questions, and hopefully we'll get to them all today, if there's something I don't understand, then I'll unmute you and we can have a discussion about it. This just helps keep it fairly streamlined. And so the first question I got deals with the charts that we're using. It was a question about the birth details. I only share the birth details of a chart when I've got permission to do that. So I use charts anonymously. So if you see a chart where I'm giving you the birth details, it's because the person has said, sure, you can share this information. Usually a lot of clients say, yeah, you can use my chart, but don't share my personal information. So I'm not going to be able to share the birth details for this particular chart. The next one maybe. But anyway, if so, I'll let you know. And if you're used to using a different style of chart, I understand completely. What I'd like to encourage you to do is either learn this style of chart, because this is the one that I typically use, or just take a moment or two to go through and convert this to a chart. I'm a big believer in doing things manually, and actually I'm a big believer in not just using a computer software program, but if I would have generated this chart with my computer software, I would actually go back and redraw it out in my notebook. And I would redraw out all the Vargas as well. I know it seems redundant, but what I found, interestingly enough, is that by me drawing out the chart and seeing where things are placed, using my hands to do that, I actually get insights while I'm doing that. So I think there's something to actually drawing out a chart. So I would encourage you to do that if you aren't used to this, and I would encourage you to do it anyway. Okay, so any questions so far before we jump right into this topic, which is quite detailed? Is there anything about the philosophical aspects that I've gone over today? Okay, I'll give you the degrees. The degrees they're not going to be exceptionally important for the principles we're going to go over today, but as we progress through the steps of looking at a chart, I'll do my best to make these degrees a little bit clearer But for today, oh, how about that? Does that make it any better? Okay, great. Yeah, some of these documents don't really zoom in very well, so hopefully this will work. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and just talk about some ways to look at dashas. What are dashas as well? We'll start with that. What are dashas? So a dasha, particularly the Vimshottari Dasha, which is the one we're using, it's a nakshatra-based dasha. And what does that mean? It means that based on the placement of the moon at birth, wherever that moon is, that's going to give us an indication, that's going to give us an indication of how the dashas are going to start. And if we look over here on the right, we'll see that this person, they were born, 3 months, May 8th, 1978. And you can get that by looking to see what dasha they were in at 0 years, 3 months. Let's see, did I do that right? No, I'm incorrect there. Hold on one moment. Let's see. Yeah. Well, I don't want to give out the birth information anyway. But point being, these dashas, they're always going to be in this particular order, meaning that wherever it starts in your particular chart, Venus will always follow Ketu, the Sun will always follow Venus, Moon will always follow the Sun. This will always be the order of the Vimshottari Mahadasha period. Now, where it starts is dependent on where your Moon was placed at birth. Okay, let's see here. Just double checking something. If I can. Okay, right. So in this particular dasha, the moon was in a nakshatra, and we're not going into the nakshatras, so please don't ask me about that. That is another topic, which I believe is a wonderful topic, very good to learn about, but we're just understanding what the terminology is. So the moon was placed in a nakshatra that was ruled by Mercury, which is why this person's chart, the dashas started in the Mercury dasha. So whatever the lord of the nakshatra that your moon is placed in, that's going to tell us how the dashas start. And so, for example, I think I was born in a Saturn dasha. So for me, my dasha started with Saturn and then went to Mercury, Ketu, Venus, Sun, Moon, and it's going to continue in that way. Yours might be different, but it's always going to be in this order. And what exactly is happening when we're looking at the dashas? Well, each planet has a position in your birth chart, and it means something. It's doing something. It's indicating a particular karma that you have. Which means that when you're in a particular Mahadasha, that whatever that planet's doing, whatever it's influencing, whatever it's indicating, it's going to be during that dasha that that planet takes center stage, which is why we have these different chapters within our life. You know, at one point in time I was a massage therapist. Another point in time I worked for an online high school. I eventually built up my practice astrologically, so I'm a full-time astrologer, and I've published books. I've done a lot of different things, but it was dependent on the dasha that was going on at the time that gave the influence of that possibility within my life. And we all have these, which is why when someone goes into a 10th house period, Saturn in the 10th, or for this chart, Saturn in the 10th, or the Lord of the 10th, Sun, that's going to show a strong focus on career. Now, that's the general indication, which means one thing that you can really easily do is, if you know what the houses mean, you can get just a general sense of what's a person going to be doing during from 1978 to 1984, or 1984 to 2004. Well, during the Saturn cycle, which this person doesn't go until 2060, there's going to be a strong career influence coming into play. Now it's going to be colored by whatever Saturn means and represents, but we see that it's in the 10th house, so it's a focus on career and activity within the world. 2004 to 2010, well, she was in a Sun cycle. The Sun rules the 10th house, it's in the first. Well, this was a time period where there is a strong emphasis on self-development within one's career, rising through the ranks, promotion, which again is a sun-related thing. So with these Mahadasha periods, major periods, which are single, that'll tell you what is the main emphasis that is going on in a person's life during that broad period of time. Now here's where it gets tricky, and this is why you really need to be easy with yourself when it comes to predictions. I chose this chart in particular because the bhava cusps are lined up very well with the houses, meaning that this first Rashi, first cusp, second Rashi, Sagittarius, second cusp, third Rashi, Capricorn, third cusp. It doesn't always happen this way. So if you have Kala and you create these charts, you might have the sixth and the fifth and the sixth in the same Rashi. And the reason I bring this up is because let's say the person's in the sun period, which we know just by the nature of their chart, it's going to have an influence on career. Well, that sun is also going to have an emphasis in relation to the person's spouse. So what might it mean for this individual that the sun is in the seventh house from the seventh house? Because the seventh house represents a spouse or partnership. And if we draw a little line here and make this the ascendant, because that's where the seventh cusp is, then we can read this chart from that seventh cusp. And so the sun being in the seventh from this new ascendant, that's going to have a much different emphasis in the partner's life. Let's pretend we want to know something about the father. Let's stick with the mother. That one's a little bit easier because there's this controversy around ninth house or 10th house for father. Let's just keep it simple. Let's say the mother. Well, now we want to look at, we make a little line here, pretend this is the ascendant from the fourth cusp. And now during the sun dasha, we see that the sun is going to be in the 10th house from the indicator of mother. So again, this is going to be career time period for the mother as well. And this is what I mean why dashas can be so complicated. And this is why it drives me a little nuts sometimes when clients just want me to tell them something. When there's no direction in regards to what do you want to know, because I can tell them all kinds of stuff, but it might not have anything to do with what's pertinent within their life. So keep this in mind, that when it comes to dashas, if you're going to just look at a chart and think about what's it going to be about, well, it can be about all kinds of things, because it's not just happening from the ascendant, it's also happening from the second house, which could deal with finances and resources, or the 11th house, which is financial gains. Having the ruler, if we make this the ascendant, the 11th house, the 11th bhava cusp, well, having the ruler of the 12th and the 3rd is going to have a very different impact on this person's wealth and financial gains and inflow of cash. So yes, it may be a career time period, but if we look at it from a different angle, it might not necessarily be the greatest time period for wealth. It might require a lot of hard work. Okay, so quick question. Let me finish this thought. So they might be doing a lot of things. They might be rising, but they might not necessarily be getting the wealth that they expect. So that's why when you're looking at dashas, you have to look at the chart holistically. Okay, so question comes up. So are you saying that the numbers towards the center, so these are the numbers here, are where the cusps of each house begin? So is the fourth house cusp from the number 4, okay, hold on. So is the fourth house cusp from the number 4 to the number 5? I don't quite understand that. I'm going to unmute you here for a moment, Peggy, if you don't mind. Let's see, where are you? Okay, I think you're unmuted.
Me?
Yeah, did you ask that question, Peggy?
Yes. So where the number 4 is lying?
Okay, so right here where the number 4 is?
Correct.
Okay.
Would that be the beginning of the fourth house cusp?
That is the fourth house cusp.
Okay, so there's not a beginning or end?
No. Yeah, it's a little bit different. Are you thinking like in terms of Western astrology?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, right. So again, I don't know a whole lot about Western astrology yet. I'm learning, but with the cusps, they're not. It's not like in between Capricorn and Aquarius. Like that's a cusp. It's the cusp is just a point. So it could be right in the center of the sign, right? Like so, for example, in this ascendant where we see the ascendant is 10 degrees 2, that means that's the cusp of the first house.
Okay, right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So it's not a beginning. It's just because this house is also from 0 to 10 as well as it is from 10 to 30. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, I understand the whole house of the Vedic astrology,
Uh-huh.
But I haven't listened to the cusp information
Okay.
that you or maybe Ernst have.
Okay.
So that's why I was asking. But I can do research. I don't want to take the time for that right now.
Okay. Well, the only thing you got to know is that with the cusps, they're just points. So it's not like a beginning or an end. It's just a sensitive point within that particular chart. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good. All right. So anyway, point being, when it comes to dashas, and this is the other thing, we are just looking at the Rashi here, which means we can say a lot about the sun period just from the Rashi. But the other thing we have to consider, let's see if I can zoom in. If I go down here, this is the 9th divisional chart, and this is the 3rd divisional chart. And there are going to be, 13 other divisional charts we're going to look at. And the sun is in Scorpio here in this 3rd divisional chart, but it's in the 9th house in the 3rd divisional chart. The sun is in Cancer in the Navamsha. So not only do we have the option to look at all the possible combinations of what the sun means in the birth chart from each cusp, but we also have the option to look to see what is the sun doing in each Varga. All right, so you can see what a massive undertaking it is to actually do dashas well, which is again why the way I do this is when I'm working with a client, typically I say, what do you want to know? Give me 5 questions, things you specifically want me to look at. That way I can find the right cusp, I can find the right Varga, I can zero in on the planets that are going on during that particular time, and I can give you some pretty good information. That's usually the best way to do it. Otherwise, again, I think you'll get bogged down and overwhelmed. With particular things. However, the great thing about the dashas, as we'll see as we go along, is that if you know what a planet represents and what it means, like again, let's take a look at this sun here in this chart. If you know that the sun rules the 10th house, and that has to do with career, activity within career, status, and if you know that, then what you can do is you can simply focus on what does it mean to have the 10th and the 1st? What does it mean that Saturn, let's see, is Saturn aspecting that? Yep, to 58 points. What does it mean that Saturn is aspecting that sun in regards to a person's career? What does it mean that Mercury is with that sun in regards to a person's career? And then what you can do is you can zoom into their Dashamsha, their 10th divisional chart, and say, well, what's going on with the sun in the Dashamsha? So the chart has a way of sort of pointing you in the right direction so that you can speak to the most important aspects of a person's chart. But again, there's so much going on that it's really better to ask. Just ask, what do you want to know? And most of the time I found that people who want me to just tell them whatever, they're either trying to prove that astrology doesn't work, or they're going for more the entertainment aspect of astrology, like being wowed by, this guy knew that. And that used to be a lot of fun. I used to like doing that. But now it just seems it's better if you focus. So keep that in mind, focus. All right, so let's keep on looking here. So we've already talked about the dashas, the mahadashas, and what they're going to mean, how you can see what's going on within a person's chart. Well, we also have these different levels of dashas. And so this chart goes down Moon Jupiter, Moon Saturn, Moon Mercury, and then it goes down to 3 levels. And what's going on here with these levels, for those of you that don't know, just like this cycle repeats itself, well, this cycle also repeats itself, which means that in 2020, when she goes into her Antardasha cycle, of Mars, that means at the end of the moon, the very end of the moon cycle is always going to be moon sun.